Okay, everybody, we should be to the point where our game plays. And when it plays, it creates all of these different obstacles in 8 different lanes, 4 sets of cars, 4 logs, and they're all traveling in opposite directions. This is a very simplified version of the obstacles, and some of your challenges is to make those more complex by either putting in more cars in each lane, or if you want to dive into making every one of these logs, every other log, a set of turtles, that is also a good challenge. For this video, we are going to work on actually having these clones interact with the frog, so that if the frog hits one of the cars, it loses a life and then goes back to the beginning. If it touches one of the logs, it should move along with the log, left or right, depending on that particular log. Now, in case you haven't, I have a couple of other variables. I do want a lives variable. And when I click the green flag, I want to set that to 3. I've also created a obstacle speed variable, and I'm setting that to 3 as well. This should be a global variable because we want to utilize this variable on our cars, but also on the frog. So when you say make a new variable and you call this obstacle speed, make sure that it says for all sprites. Okay. Now we need to do a little bit of detection. So I have my life set to 3. I have my obstacles set to 3. Down in our move block, we had this custom move block. We want to make sure we have placed that obstacle speed into our move steps. This will allow us to change the steps as we see fit, in case we want to slow up or speed down the game. But it's also so that we can move the frog at that same speed when it is on one of the logs. I have also created over here a new set of code that is going to detect when an obstacle is touching the frogs. Now this is on our obstacle sprite, and we are starting with the event when I start as a clone, because this will be attached to individual clones. We always want to check, which means forever block, and then we have some conditional statements. The first one uses an operator and here, and we want to check to see if this particular clone, if its Y position is less than 0. If it is, we know it's a car. And we want to check if that frog player is also being touched. If so, we know the frog has been hit by the car. These AND operators work where each side has to be true before the code is executed. If neither one or either one of these is true, it will not execute this code. I built this block by putting in the less than block here, and then this sensing block of touching, utilizing the frog player. And under the motion, there is getting the Y position, which would then go in here. That is how we built this particular conditional statement. When that happens, we also want to broadcast. We want to send a message to the frog that it has been hit. To do that, we have these event blocks called broadcast. And if you click down, you can say new message and create a new message. I made mine frog hit. And then I dragged that into my conditional statement and selected frog hit. The other side of this is to now go to the frog and create an action when it receives that broadcast. In this case, when I receive frog hit, which again is another event that is under the the event blocks. When I receive frog hit, I'm having it set the frog back to the beginning. and then change my lives variable by -1. If I were to test this out, put my frog into the street and have it hit by a car, sure enough, my lives went down by 1 up here, and my frog has gone back to the center. Cool. Now we need to do the same thing for the logs. So there's another conditional statement here. This is another if statement. And I'm actually going to move this part out just for this explanation. This first if statement is if the y position is greater than 0. This is how we know that it is on a log, or if this happens to be a turtle, and it's touching the frog player. If that is true, this obstacle is a log. If that is true, I want to put in new conditional statements inside of that if statement. So that this is called a nested if statement, where one if conditional statement is inside of another. If this is an obstacle that is a log, I also want to check the direction of that log. Direction, again, is under motion, and it will provide you what direction that particular clone or this sprite is pointed. If it is 90, I know this log is moving to the right. It's one of the first or the third logs. And I want to broadcast a frog drag right. Again, you'll bring that event in from the broadcast area, drag down, go to new message, call it frog drag right, and place that block inside. We also want to check the opposite if the direction is -90. So this is the same block, but I'm checking to see if it's -90, which means the log is moving to the left. In that case, I'm going to broadcast frog drag left, which you'll have to also create. To complete this on the other side, we're going to go to frog player. And what we want to do is when we receive frog drag left or frog drag right, let's start with the right, we want to change the x by that obstacle speed. So this obstacle speed variable is being utilized by the obstacles and by the frog. This enables the frog to be able to move left and right with the logs after it jumps on. Here's a demonstration. Jump up over to the logs, jump on the log, and I am moving with my log. I can still jump left and right, but I move with that log as well. Now, when we drag to the left, frog drag left, when we receive this, I'm changing my x by the obstacle speed times -1 to make it go in the other direction. Multiplying it by -1, since it was 90, since I am changing x, I want it to go to the opposite direction, and I multiply it by -1 to make that happen. Last but not least, we also want a new sprite called water. This water is simply a square that is the same color as the water, as you can see up here. Its costume is a square that fits over the top of where the logs are. Now, it is a little bit shorter than the actual water area. I'm doing that to avoid the gap between the log and the actual grass over here, because this becomes problematic if we make it larger. So in my frog area in the code, I also have a new block here. When the green flag is clicked, I'm going to forever check if I'm touching that new sprite called water, and I am not touching the obstacles. Not as a new operator, and it will return the opposite of whatever this ends up being. If it is true that I'm touching obstacles, Placing this inside the not will return false if I'm touching the obstacles. This was then placed inside of my AND operator on the right-hand side, and my touching water was placed in the left side. This allows me to check to see if I'm touching the water, but I'm not touching any of the obstacles, including the logs or the turtles. And if that is true, I must have fallen in the water, and therefore I'm going to go back to the beginning and again change my lives by -1. In the game, this can be demonstrated by simply jumping into the water. If I jump in the water, I instantly go back to the beginning and I have lost a life. If I happen to be touching a log while I jump in the water, since I'm using that not statement, I can survive the water by being on one of the logs. That's the basics of having your clones interact with your player for the purpose of losing a life or making it past the water.